All right, we are live. It's like the 20th time of trying this, and I am waiting for Andy to pop up here. All right, Andy, where you at? There he is. Oh, look at this. Adding.
Whoa, is this going to work?
It's actually working. We are doing this.
There we go.
Okay, very good. And me and Kyle is still hanging out with us. So after a couple interruptions and some trouble here with technology. So I don't know. I see your video like right next to my head.
Yeah, same with you.
Okay. So do I need to just like sit off to the side here and not? I probably shouldn't do this.
There you go.
No. Okay. All right. So wow, we got this working. Unbelievable. So now I have to figure out if I should flip my phone, but I can't do
Just
that
like
now that
crank
I've
your head
started.
like this the whole time. Like that.
Okay. Same like that. I'm already kind of. All right. There we go. Perfect. Wow. Well, that was a lot. We've tried YouTube. We tried Facebook multiple times on different pieces of technology and finally got it working here. So thanks, Andy, for being patient. So we got a couple of people watching, but really our heart, and Andy, we'll get into this as we move forward with the interview, but our heart as we're getting going here, we'd love to do some informal interviews, maybe once a month with different Lutheran church planters around the country and just hear their story of what they're doing, what God is doing through their ministry, and maybe best practices or lessons that they've been learning as they've been doing church planting. And there is, to my knowledge, there is no other social media platform, resource page for the Lutheran church plants other than this Facebook group, which we started a couple years ago. And so I feel like we're loners in some ways of trying to figure out what does it mean to do Lutheran church planting. And I know there's other people doing it, and I know quite a few of them, so I hope to get some of those guys from different traditions on here, CLB, LCMS, our own AFLC tradition and whatnot, and maybe some other sacramental traditions as well, some Anglicans, we've hung out with them. So
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of the big picture there, and I don't know how this interview will go. Like I said, pretty informal. It's not going to be chopped up later on or high production or anything like that. So hope it works well, and we'll see. It's a test. If it's horrible, we'll delete it.
It certainly has started out kind of bumpy, so.
It did. But yeah, all good things start out bumpy, they say, right? I don't know if they say that or not. I just made that up. So Pastor Andrew Coyle, also known as Andy Coyle, is a pastor at Shiloh Free Lutheran Church in Rapid City, South Dakota. And you've been there now about, what, 5 years? 5.5 years?
No, like 3. A little
3?
over 3, yep.
All right,
But,
I feel like it's been longer than that.
yeah, I know.
Wow.
Yep. 3
So,
years and almost 3.5.
okay,
Getting
3.5
close to
years.
3.5.
Okay, wow, yeah. It
So.
feels like longer than that. But for the audience, Andy and I have become very close friends over the last couple of years. Opportunity to minister together and talk, sometimes almost weekly, fellow minister in the gospel and encourager in church planting. So I'm excited, Andy. It's very appropriate that you're the very first person to get interviewed on this because in many respects you had a huge role in even in inspiring me and the Lord using you to help my wife and I to walk through this gate of church planting. So we'll get into that, but why don't you just really big picture, give us a little bit of your story, how you came to Christ, and then how you got to where you are today. So however long you want to take to share that, a couple of minutes, give us that in a snippet if you could.
So how I got to church planting today?
Yeah.
So, okay. Maybe I'll just focus on that a little bit more, because that would be more pertinent, I guess. So
Okay.
I never really thought about church planting. In fact, it was kind of terrifying back in seminary, and Honestly, I never really wanted to be a pastor, period. I wanted to be a teacher. But certainly in seminary, preparing for ministry, it was never really on the radar. I never really heard a lot of positive stories about it, and it was just never anything that was like something that was exciting to think about even. We were planning missions, and that's what really got us into ministry in general and all through seminary. And so thinking about our ministry in Eastern Europe and planning on moving overseas after seminary, and obviously a lot of things changed throughout the last 10 years. Um, Serving two churches right out of seminary in Iowa, established churches, old churches, wonderful experience for Monica and I. Really, we needed that more than anything, of just trying to figure out how to serve and learn how to be a pastor. And so that was something that was very important for us. And yet God showed us through that wasn't something that we were going to stay forever. Sorry, my phone's dying.
I thought you were going to give us a tour of your home.
Yeah.
This is church planter hospitality. Here's our home.
Yes, right. Okay, 1 second here. Yeah. There we go. And so, realizing that, God did have that call for missions on our hearts, and he used that restlessness in me in that established churches to get us over to Ukraine. And so, we moved overseas and started a Bible school over there. And that was a wonderful time, and we never really thought we would come back from that as quick as we did. Of course, the situation over in Ukraine was and is still pretty volatile, but God closed that door after 4 years of living over there and serving over there and loving every minute of it in general. And so the question became for us, what do we do next? How's God have our next story, I guess? And thinking back to how God had built us and how God had wired us as a couple, but then also just me too, I knew that I did not want to go back into an established church, not because they're not wonderful, not because the people aren't wonderful, but just knowing how I am built. And I think God has really helped me to see that in the last, 5 years, 6 years, that it would not be fair to that church or to my family to be there for a year or two and then all of a sudden get restless again, because I love starting things and I love being on the forefront of something new. And that's that's just how I'm wired. And so then I started thinking about church planting, because we had already been missionaries. And so it's kind of a natural thing for us to start thinking missions in America. And so then that one thing led to another, and all of a sudden I'm talking to you as on the call team for Abiding Savior, thinking about Shiloh and really just seeing God work through that. And of course, coming back here the summer of 2015, but not really starting here at Shiloh until October of 15. So really it hasn't even been 3.5 years. But that's kind of the broad, big picture, partly just realizing how God has built me to have a passion for something pioneering and something mission and something constantly changing and evolving. I know that I'm just kind of built for that, and I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful that I've been able to see in many ways what my gifts are and what my gifts aren't, and seeing that God has us here for this time right now, and loving that challenge.
Yeah, so that one of the things I'm hearing you say is really reflecting upon how God has wired you, how he's made you, your strengths, your weaknesses. And that's one of the things we see a lot in this conversation about church planting, is the importance of God can use anybody, but the importance of seeing a specific wiring within the planting pastor, that there's a greater chance of burnout. Already there's a high chance of burnout for planters, but there's a greater chance of burnout if you're not wired in a certain way. If you're not a go-getter, if you're not someone who has some sense of vision, if you're not somebody who really enjoys creating systems and processes and inviting people into that, you're probably going to get burnt out pretty quick. And church planting is extremely difficult as it is. So I know that's one of the big things you hear a lot of networks and denominations talking about the importance of. So yeah, And I know that was one of the things as I was able to serve on the call team from Abiding Savior for Shiloh, and we saw in you just that gifting and that passion and that heart to be in that position. So it's neat to see how God brought those two things together and has led you to where you are today.
Mm-hmm.
So Andy, what would you say as you? Every church is different, right? Established churches are one thing. Older churches are one thing. New churches are one thing. Small churches are one thing. Big churches are one thing, right? They all have a different dynamic. And there are certainly similarities between them, but they all have different dynamics. Right. Church plants are all different. They're not all the same, right? Context makes a big difference. Size of the city, even geographically where it's located, things like that. So you got called to a very specific church plant. They're all specific, but you got called to one. Paint a picture, if you could, of your context of which you got called into in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Yeah, it's really an interesting history and culture here. There were I don't know, about 4 or 5 retired couples that had moved here, and the desire, of course, was to start a church, and they were meeting faithfully, Bible study, and just starting to worship. And it really wasn't until Abiding Savior, of course, got involved that we got here. And so coming here with my family, it was essentially our family. At that time, we were, Levi was just turning a year old. And then, so we had 4 kids. And then with those, 4 or 5 retired couples. And so that was kind of the context. It was very small, but good. And it was very relational, which was good. Rapid City is a very interesting area within the Lutheran world, simply because Lutheran out here, in many contexts, is not a positive thing. It means liberal, and so that's been a challenge. We can talk about that later too. But our context was, in a sense, kind of a rolling start. There had been some people gathering, but not really trying to figure out who they were. And so it allowed us to kind of put in place and work together to discover who we want to be as a congregation. And so really our first year was just getting to know one another and not coming in as a parachute, like you are actually, and not with a lot of the vision already set in place. For us, just getting back from the mission field and having all the craziness that happened and kind of getting our feet under our ground here, and then trying to learn who we had as a core team that was already there, and trying to figure out where are we going to be as a congregation, where are we going to go, and things like that. And so in that way, there were both, pluses and minuses with that, really. I'm sure obviously every method has that. And so learning how to function as a team and to grow together, I think that was good. And it's obviously we're still doing that, even though we've grown and are developing. But the context here in Rapid City, it's just very different than other parts of the Midwest. You've got it's really conservative politically, but more liberal theologically, at least within the more mainline churches, certainly in the Lutheran world. And so that affects, who we are and who we're ministering to, and how people see us when they see that word Lutheran in our name, and just the culture with strong Native American population, and the Deadwood prostitution, gambling, and the rallies, and it's just an interesting kind of cowboy culture that has its own little unique place in the Midwest. And we love living in here. We love the culture, but it is really interesting as the more we're learning about it, and how we then try to fit in as a congregation to try to bless and encourage our people here and reach out in their community.
Yeah, that's good, man. There's so much, and we'll have to have a podcast just on talking about exegeting context, because that's a really important skill for anyone in ministry, but especially church planners, missionaries, exegeting their culture and their context that they're in. So we'll talk more about that sometime in the future. But I would love to hear a little bit more, because this is what makes us unique and why we're doing what we're doing, because there are tons of church planning podcasts out there. I mean, I have on my phone, I don't know, probably 7 or 10 of them. There's a ton of people out there doing that, and good resources. But really, the only other one that is coming at it from a sacramental perspective is one that you and I have appreciated, Always Forward
Right.
podcasts, and
Mm-hmm.
they've done a great job. So we commend that to our Lutheran brothers out there. If you are wanting to learn more about what that looks like, check them out, Always Forward.
Mm-hmm.
But what would you say, Andy? What does it mean to plant a uniquely Lutheran church? I know this is a big, huge question, but what does it mean to plant a uniquely Lutheran church?
Yeah, that is a massive question, and in some ways it's a black and white question. In some ways it's completely contextualized, I think, because again, in our context, a Lutheran congregation it's unique because we're coming at it within the free Lutheran world, certainly, and so no one has a clue what that is out here. And so then when you say Lutheran, they think liberal or dead or whatever else. There's not a very strong biblical presence out here. I mean, there's a number of LCMS churches, but compared to the broader Lutheran world out here, it's definitely more liberal, and so that does make it a slightly difficult thing. I think, within the Lutheran understanding of theology in general, we are a very theological church, certainly, and theology is very important to us. And as we apply that into our own context, that it's just interesting because people look at us like, you kind of sound like us, and yet you don't sound like us, and so that is a unique thing within the American church culture, is just our real focus on law gospel, on Christ crucified and Christ risen, gospel motivation, all those types of things. And so then as in our proclamation, then it's going to come across different, which is good. And people want that. People are hungry for law gospel preaching, and they've been burdened by legalism or whatever else, And so certainly there's a very strong theological focus, I think, within Lutheran church planting that fills a void there that I think people want, and certainly we're still learning what that means to be contextualized in that theology. But certainly then there's this mystery. There's a mystery there within our Lutheran theology that people don't get either. As we talk about the sacraments, as we talk about something physical, carrying with it something spiritual and beautiful and powerful and life-giving, and all the ways in which we talk about sacramental theology, there's a certain mystery there that is also a part of how we worship and what we celebrate and what we talk about, of saying things that God says and the Scripture says, and you're not trying to over-explain things and under-explain things, and yet doing things that people look at us like, what are you doing, and why are you doing that, and so, of course, that's no different than any other Lutheran church in our country too. But within the planting world, when you have a lot of people that are coming in either from no background or from maybe just a regular American evangelical kind of background, there's a lot of wonder there. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of skepticism, certainly. And so then that's a big part. You don't have a massive core within your church even, or a community that is just nailed down on those issues. So there's a lot of teaching. There's a lot of just straight describing what you are, and that's a good thing. That's part of being a mission thing. But as far as, so within Lutheran church planting, obviously there's that tension of being strongly biblical and theological and yet sacramental, and trying to figure out how to play that out in everyday life, and teaching your people how to value that. And certainly I think there's been times where I feel like I've done a good job at that, and times that I've failed at that, certainly. And so that's one aspect. I think another aspect that is unique to us is our strong love of history, and how we want to see that played out into the life of the congregation too, within our worship. And certainly that can be contextualized too, and it should be contextualized, but that's also something different. And so as we think of Lutheran church planting, and again, this is a massive topic, there's just so many things then that can be connected into this, thinking theologically and thinking historically, thinking our worship styles, and but all of that then is contextualized into where you're at. And so for us, that might look a little different than you down there or other places. So it's a hard question that really can take so many angles on it, depending on the topic, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it's true. It can be a tough one. What would you say though on that? What are positively stated? What are the things that make Lutherans unique in our American evangelical context? If you're to say positively stated, here are the things that we feel like are real treasures that we have as Lutherans. What would those be that you would say like we're holding on to and we're trying to put forward as a church?
Yeah, and I think, just from our experience out here and what I've seen, I also teach at a local Christian high school, and so I get to hear a lot of other Christian groups and Christian pastors that are speaking and stuff like that, and so then it just makes me love and cherish our utter stubbornness on the gospel even more, and how and I think honestly that's one of the best things that we have. The gifting is just the clarity of Christ crucified and the application of the forgiveness of sins and the proclamation of the cross and the freeing message of the gospel. I think that's central, certainly, as the primary means of grace, right? The gospel. And so I think that is something that I've probably never realized back in my previous context or even in Ukraine that I see now is just the beauty and the richness that our tradition has, as it's just simply always about Jesus. It's always about Christ, and that pervades everything. Of course, obviously that impacts sacraments and everything else. But I think if I were to say the number one thing, it would be just the stubbornness to focus on the gospel. You're always talking about Jesus. It's always about the cross, and that's a good thing.
That is a really good thing, right? And that definitely is the strong point of Lutheranism is kind of our history, what got us, made us a reform of the Catholic Church, right? Was over that specific issue that it's all about Jesus.
Well, and at the end of the day, I know we can take this so many different directions as we think about forms and we think about sacraments. At the end of the day, though, people want Christ. They're frustrated with superficiality, or they're frustrated with the legalism, or they're frustrated with whatever else that they might see. And I see that a lot with people, that they just really want, or they don't realize until they see it that they needed that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I want to press on that just a little bit, because in some ways, there's maybe this whole left side, the left theology and the right theology being like the ultra liberal and the ultra conservative, and this whole spectrum in between. And in some ways, I'm seeing this resurgence within American evangelicalism in some ways of like the Reformed theology, which I'm encouraged by. This Reformed theology, which has a robust view of total depravity and therefore a robust view of God's grace, given through Jesus Christ. And we see a lot of that. So within the SBC, the Southern Baptist, within the PCA, the Presbyterian Church, Conservative Presbyterian Church, and even non-denoms across the board, we see this really robust theology of the gospel, which is encouraging. Praise God. We're glad to see that. So we see networks like Acts 29, which is a church planting network, and that's what they're all about. They want to see gospel-centered congregations being planted, and they're all about. I would say they're preaching the gospel just as much as Lutheran congregations out there. Yeah, they do have some differences, absolutely. So all my Lutheran friends don't have to send me Facebook messages and telling me how we're different. I know, I get it. But they're preaching the gospel. And in some ways, I would say they're doing even a better job when it comes to how does the gospel inform and transform our lives on a daily basis. They're doing a great job on that. So recognizing that yes, there's a spectrum of people who are preaching and who aren't preaching the gospel. What makes us different, though, from, say, our Reformed Baptist friends who are preaching the gospel every single Sunday? They're preaching the gospel in their sermons and in their hymns and in their liturgy. What makes us different beyond that? If you could, I'm just trying to press you a little bit more on that. As Lutherans, what makes us distinct from them? Why don't we go join the Reformed Baptist Church and say, hey, we're both preaching the gospel, let's throw in our lot together?
Hmm. Well, well, obviously we have different theology. That's kind of one of the main points there. But I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, our view and our focus on sacraments obviously is a big thing, and certainly they have a strong view of the sacraments in some ways. Obviously, it differs than ours too. But I think, you know, the appreciation we have with um, what I've again continued to learn to appreciate would be the historical connection of the church, of historical theology, of liturgy, and how it's woven all together in with our focus on the sacraments, on that we actually look to physical things that do things, whether that's the scriptures as a physical thing, or of course Christ himself, but then the Lord's Supper and baptism. We point people to physical things. We
Hmm.
point people to things outside of themselves for assurance. You know, I think so oftentimes the connection is look to yourselves, look to your performance, look to something
Hmm.
that you can measure within yourself. And yet I think Lutherans are, again, stubbornly saying, no, don't look inside. Don't look to something inside of you or your performance, your fruit, but look to something outside of you, namely in Christ, or namely in the waters of life, or the table of the scriptures. And so I think that is also something within our emphasis that is a beautiful aspect, that is something very earthy and something very physical that we can look to for assurance and for comfort and for grace and forgiveness. Of course, Christ is in all that, and that's where we
Yeah.
see the gospel. But I think that's also something very different, that as we talk about the gospel, where we point people towards and some of the methods and the work within that, it just comes out differently, and it's going to be applied differently. And we're going to point people to different things oftentimes.
Yeah. That's really good. That's gold right there. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to tease out a little bit is our sacramental theology is huge, right? That's what makes us unique. But I guess with that said, what's interesting is we do see this, again, spectrum even within Lutheranism,
Mm-hmm.
who Lutheran church plants that are going to look like, an evangelical church plant down the road, a Southern Baptist church plant down the road. They're going to look very similar in their form and their language and how they act. And then maybe on the other end of the spectrum, we're going to find really high churches that are being planted as
Mm-hmm.
well. So hopefully we'll be able to interview some of the people on both ends of that spectrum. And there's all types of, inner Lutheran debates happening. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that specifically looking at how does God bestow and give his grace and the forgiveness of
Mm-hmm.
sins and life through word and sacrament ministry. In my mind, that really is the thing that binds us together
Mm-hmm.
as Lutherans, a really key thing
Mm-hmm.
out there. So what would you say has been maybe the greatest challenge or two of planting a uniquely Lutheran church?
Um,
So we can talk about general, challenges that church planners face, and we'll talk more about that. But on this topic, specifically being Lutheran, trying to plant a Lutheran church, what are some of those unique challenges that come with that?
yeah. And I think this is something that I've been needing to always get tighter on too, because I can look back and say, oh, I should have focused on that more, or I should have maybe been clearer on this, or maybe I focused on one area more than another. Um, Obviously, there's a contextual issue there too, because, and
Hmm.
I keep coming back to that, but what kind of baggage does Lutheranism have, the Lutheran Church have in your area? So that's going to factor into it. So we have people that clearly have said, "Oh, I'll never say." They specifically have said, "I said I would never go into a Lutheran church again because it was just dead and it was
Hmm.
liberal and it was awful." And somehow they found themselves to Shiloh. And so it's in our context, it's been a struggle to even get people to want to come to a Lutheran church,
Hmm.
simply because of the baggage that they grew up in, or that they see in our culture or in our local society. So that's a maybe more of an outreach kind of a thing that we deal with. But I think, another challenge is helping people to appreciate and see what is the core of the Lutheran faith, and what are some of the things that are flexible within that, and what are the things that aren't, and to love that as opposed to just being a church.
Hmm.
And that's something I think that I'm also struggling with at Shiloh, and that's the normal thing, I suppose, is how to get people to really love that and embrace that, without not necessarily looking down or, you know, bemoaning other churches or other groups or whatever. To
Hmm.
kind of keep that tension of humility and yet also love for that tradition. And so I think that that's a challenge. Again, this is a theological question. It's a practical question within styles of worship. And again, you mentioned the lower church, higher church. Our church is kind of blended in that way. And just trying to teach people the value of being connected to the historic church. And I've talked about that quite a bit, actually. And capital
Hmm.
C church, and the value of learning from other believers. And that's far bigger than a Lutheran thing. But
Yeah. Yep.
I think that is a challenge, though, that people see the value in that, so that when you do something with liturgy, that they just learn to love that and not just see it as something
Hmm.
awful or dead. I think
Hmm.
that's something that every Lutheran church planner probably deals with, or should deal with, among other
Hmm.
traditions. And so, yeah, I think it's a tricky question, just simply because of things that I should have done better or can still do better, and yet wanting our people to love who they are too.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That's really good. That's so part of that first part is your context, which South Dakota, if I remember right, is 30% professing Lutheran. 30% of the population professes to be Lutheran across the state, and of course that's going to be pockets, right?
Right.
Much lower, probably out in Rapid City. But if you have a bunch of people moving from eastern South Dakota, say Sioux Falls, and retiring out in Rapid City, and they've been exposed to a lot of the liberal Lutheranism, I can see how that would be a big problem, right? So they're bringing that experience into the picture, and you say we're Lutheran. They have all types of images that pop into their mind that you have to deconstruct before you can construct a new picture of here's what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you begin that process of discerning and exegeting where people are coming from, and how do you do that without just walking on eggshells all the time? Because that seems like, again, there's an extreme
Right.
of let's walk on eggshells and water everything down and be as generic as possible, or the other end is we show zero sensitivity to that, and we're just going to state it right in their face and not even seek to discern where they're at or what they're coming from. How do you hold a tension between those two?
Yeah. I'm learning that uh, simply because everybody's different, and I think what has been a little bit surprising for us in our a little over 3 years here is that the majority of our people haven't found us because they've been looking for a Lutheran church.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, a lot of it's just been relationships we met, and it's just developed from there. And people maybe weren't going to church, or they were not happy with where they're at. And I think part of that is also the historical context here, where a lot of those that were frustrated with the direction of the big Lutheran church left years ago, and they found
Hmm.
themselves in a Baptist church or E-Free church, and they're just not looking anymore. Or they jumped into an LCMS church, or whatever else, And so that's been a little bit more of a surprise. And again, we haven't targeted, disgruntled Lutherans. We haven't at all, actually.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of discussions about that, trying to get the
Hmm.
low-hanging fruit, But at the same rate, that has also shaped this question, because when you have a massive amount of people that are, percentage-wise, that really aren't interested in Lutheran theology, or that you're a Lutheran church, in fact that's not even on the radar at all, then it really does change how you come at things, because you want to be faithful to who you are, and yet you do want to be sensitive, because you're realizing that this their preconception of what Lutheran theology is might be so different than what it actually is. And that we've seen that a number of times, people having all kinds of strange ideas of what we actually believe, and yet not being real just because they saw it in some other group. And so trying to find that balance. And again, I'm still learning that, just because it would be very different if we had 75% of people coming into our church that were, you know, confirmed and convinced Lutherans, that were excited about that. It hasn't been our case at all. Very, very, very few. And that's just our culture, which is fine. And we're
Yeah.
having fun. We're having fun with that. And
Yeah.
I think there's a beauty of that too, because then we get to
Absolutely.
appreciate other traditions. And, you know, I can think of a number of guys at our church that I just flat out disagree with me, and yet we love each other, and we serve together, and we work together, and there's a beauty of that as well. And my mission experience has completely shaped that, appreciating the universal church, and learning to agree on so many the core things, and giving grace and patience with some of those distinctives that are certainly there and wanting to talk about. But so I'm still learning that question, Matthew, just because I think it's always changing in some ways too.
Yeah.
And we're clear in our new members class. This is where where we're at. But we certainly don't try to ram things down anybody's throat. Could I focus on some things more than others? Probably. There's always seasons depending on the text or depending on the situation too. And yeah, that's all I
Yeah.
got.
No, that's really good. So let me get super practical, and I know we want to keep this somewhat timely. I can't tell how long we've been going here or not.
Me neither.
Pretty good first call. It looks like, I'm guessing maybe 20 minutes or so, something like that. So we're keeping it really general, which is okay here. A lot for us to come back and discuss further. What would you say? So you've been there, like you said, 2.5, 3 years, something like that. For right now in the life of your congregation, what are some of the big things? Give us a little bit of a rundown on like how big you are, what things that you're really seeking to focus on right now in the life of your church. What would you say?
We're probably averaging about 80 a Sunday. The last couple of Sundays have been a little bit lower. We've had some bigger. And we have a lot of young families, a lot of kids, and that's something we've been really developing. Certainly, I've got a big family, and I coach, and so we're always connecting with young families. And yet, as I say that, though, we're a very intergenerational church, which I love. We don't have a ton of elderly people, but those that we do have are just awesome, and they just really mingle well with our younger families, and we have college students, and so it's a really cool environment. It's just an awesome family, and people talk about it, and they enjoy that they can learn from people of multiple generations, and so that's really a neat thing. Some of the things we're focusing on, obviously we got into a building a few months ago, and so that has kind of tightened up a few things. Obviously there's challenges with that too, but
That's another whole conversation, which is awesome.
Right.
So
Exactly.
as of like in the last 3 months,
September,
there was a building that was already being used as a church of sorts, and they closed down, and y'all were able to get that through a lot of really neat, amazing provision.
Yeah, and so with that, you know, during this last fall, we had paused all of our life groups or small groups. That had been something we'd really been focusing on, been going really well, but we wanted to try some other things, getting into a facility, and so we've been doing family nights on Wednesday nights with our kids club that we've been doing at a local gym, and it's kind of moving some things to the same facility, starting a youth ministry. We're actually this Sunday starting up our life groups again. It's going to just be a terminal thing, just 6 sessions every other week, and something that we're really hoping that people will want to invest in, simply because it's a terminal thing. It's not like, oh, I'm signing up, I'm there forever. So we have 5 groups, possibly 6, and we're excited about that. So getting that going, really big push there. Another big push that we're doing is, and something that, that's a whole nother question too, is just getting a lot of structural things in place. We've been very, very lean with our structure, and so a lot of that then has fallen on Monica and I, and with our council and getting other people involved, we're starting to build a stronger leadership team that is going to be more responsible for certain roles or certain ministries that we're really excited about. And so that is a major development part for Shiloh right now, and that's going to obviously take time to really filter out and get put in place. But we have a lot of really gifted people and people that want to serve. We just haven't had the systems or the desire for the systems yet, and that's coming in. So that's really exciting. And so actually, that's something we just rolled out last week, and we're just going to slowly keep rolling that out with people in positions and teams, along with our life groups. So that's kind of two big things in the life of our church right now that are just really going to add to our development, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, super good. So what would you say? Maybe I'll end on this question. If you were to do, actually, I won't. I'll have two more questions. This question is this: what would you have done differently as you look back as kind of a lesson, saying, man, I wish I would have done this differently. Wish we would have approached this, not done this, should have done this, focused more on this. If there was one or two big things,
oh
what would you say?
man, yeah, that's a hard one. Just simply because anytime you make a mistake, you learn from it, and it helps you get better in other things. And part of that also is the fact that there was our first 9 months here were just kind of a feeling out process and just kind of trying to figure out where we're going, what we're doing, and all that. And so even though that time felt like, okay, nothing's happening, that was a really good time for us that helped us to kind of focus like where we were going to target and all that kind of stuff. And so, man, I don't really know. Obviously we've done things wrong and we've failed in areas. Probably something that I wish I would have done better at right away is to get
This might be another interview. You might have to come back to this on another interview, huh?
The structure thing is a big thing, and our core team, wonderful people, and I'm so thankful for them. I think that really added to the strength of our church has been its relational capacity, and it's just feeling like a family. And so we were, at the outset, at least from my experience, extremely relational, and everybody mentioned that, and that's really helped us. And so that's where the giftings were relationally. The giftings were not so much operationally. So as far as like all the worship things and all the tech stuff and all the music things, those have been areas that have been a struggle for us. And it's a work in progress. But as I look back, the things to focus on is maybe try to recruit better and delegate better in those areas, and not taking so much on myself. And so I think that's just something we've learned, and yet we've grew through that too. And that's the thing, all the things that I wish I look back, I wish I wouldn't have done that. But, good things came out of it, and, God in his grace kept us together.
Amen, yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a hard question just because there's been a lot of really good things that have happened, and I'm thankful. So
Yeah, that's very good. Good. All right. Last question here. What encouragement would you give to people who are maybe interested in church planting, Lutheran church planting? They are church planting right now. I'm thinking the pastor specifically, some encouragement that you would give to them.
Yeah. Let me think. I've probably got two things maybe. The first thing, okay, there's a whole lot more things than that. Obviously, pray and read the scriptures and all the types of advice that we would give any pastor in any situation. That's the foundation. Invest in yourself spiritually. I think that's massive because church planting is draining. It's constantly changing and evolving, and you've got curveballs thrown at you all the time, and you're always tempted to carry everything on yourself. So that's one of the areas that I've learned, and certainly going back to your previous question is trying to do everything in your own power and your own strength. And so that was a major problem that I've always struggled with. So getting back into the root of sourcing everything in Christ and everything, I think that can be applied in any ministry context. I think specifically for planters, being a learner is huge, just huge. And yeah, I didn't have a clue what church planting was like. I mean, my experience was cross-cultural ministry, and certainly that was a help in many ways, but not, realizing that this is a massive resource-driven ministry. I mean, there, as you know, I mean, conferences everywhere and books and podcasts and people like that. And so it's so fun to learn. And certainly a lot of the stuff you learn, you know that it's not going to apply to your situation, whether that's theologically or practically or whatever. And yet always wanting to learn more and be challenged. That's been a huge thing for me. And so be a learner, whether that's with books and conferences and podcasts, but also with like coaching. So like, our relationship has been just awesome because, I was able to bounce things off of you, and you were to say bad idea, good idea, or whatever else, but being willing to constantly learn. That's, I think, massive. I think another one, actually I got two more, flexibility. I think that's a big one. Be willing to just throw something right into the garbage just because it's like you have this great idea in mind and you think it's just going to be perfectly fit everything, and yet no one gets into it or no one is excited about it, or like you realize halfway into it, like this is a train wreck, you shouldn't have done this, and being able to just quick change course. And I think that's where actually it's fun. So again, I'm kind of weird like that. I'm wired that way, that it's fun changing things and being on the forefront of innovation in a healthy way, obviously. But I think flexibility is key because it's just constantly changing. I mean, like your situation down there is a parachute. I mean, every day it's like something new, and you're meeting new people, and you're coming at things differently, and you're coming at with all kinds of ideas, and 70% of your ideas you're never going to use or aren't going to fit in, but it's just appreciating that. And then, so the last thing then, and I think this is a big one, is applying the gospel to yourself. As you struggle and you get frustrated and you get weary maybe, and as maybe your expectations don't show up and you get impatient, and all those types of things that go into the reality of planting or any ministry, I think it's just magnified in planting, is just applying the gospel to yourself every day. And that's pretty important to do. And knowing that, God loves you and he has forgiven you, and he is going to him as that source of motivation, big picture, mission. I think that's so important. And seeing Christ as that good shepherd to us every day. It's really, really important, because I think planters by definition tend to rely on themselves more, and that's a weakness of ours. And so just kind of recentering ourselves, the gospel and Jesus, grace, mercy, it's really important. That's at least, those are my 3 cents.
Amen, yeah.
So.
Oh, that's really good.
Those
were 4 cents, 4 ideas.
There's 4? Okay. Never good at math. So.
Your 2 cents, right? Yeah. No, really good. So yeah, reliance upon God, staying a learner, being flexible. Those kind of go hand in hand, and then just preaching the gospel to yourself, which that's a good Lutheran concept there. Yeah, for sure. Super good. Wow, man, they're so super high level kind of introduction into what who you are and what's happening there, but a lot of things we can talk about further, and hoping we can drill down into some of these ideas, like outreach, and have a podcast interview just on outreach, or what has been your all's history with renting a building and finally getting your own building, and the pros and cons. Church membership, marketing, systems and processes, thinking about preaching, mission, vision, values. What is the value of that? How does the church go about establishing those? And then even both of us have had the privilege of serving in established congregations, older established congregations that had finances and buildings and people. And there are pros and cons with that, but then moving into a planting context, pros and cons in that as
Mm-hmm.
well. So I would love to talk about even that, the differences between those two and the similarities between those two.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a ton we could talk about. I would love to hear questions even from our audience as we hopefully get into these. And again, not going to be well polished in the interviews necessarily, but hoping to interview people from different backgrounds and different contexts with that. So, and one of the joys of planning a church is having an office at home.
Well, that goes with that flexibility thing. So I'm sitting on the floor of my bedroom. So
Yeah.
it's good.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Andy,
With
thank
the
you
door
for
locked.
yeah. Yes, I have a door over here, and sometimes when I'm on a call, this important call, and the kids are on the door, knocking on it, and you're like, no, just go. Yeah,
Right.
but that's part of it. So,
Yep.
yeah, good conversation, and I look
Mm-hmm.
forward to having definitely a couple more in the months to come as well. But blessings on your ministry. Where can people find out more about Shiloh Free Lutheran Church?
Well, obviously we have a Facebook account and our website, Shiloh Church VH. I think that's what it is. .org. So you can search for that YouTube page, Shiloh Free Lutheran, under YouTube with our messages and stuff. Although that's a work in progress too. So yeah, I'm
All right.
eager to see your other interviews with the other planters from different contexts and learn from them, because I think we need to be talking to one another and encouraging one another and learning from one another and sharing resources and sharing our stories and failures and successes. So I'm loving
Amen.
that you're doing this. And yep. So
Yeah, very good.
very
I'll have
good.
you interview me sometime as well, which will be fun.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. So yeah.
Yep.
So if any of our listeners have any friends or family out in the Rapid City area, Andy's located just north of Rapid City by about 10 miles outside of
And probably not
downtown,
even that.
maybe?
Yeah, Somerset
Yep.
area. It's a bedroom town of Rapid. Yeah.
Yeah, be sure to encourage them to check out if you know someone who doesn't have a church home, encourage them to check out Shiloh Free Lutheran Church, or maybe you know someone out there and want to give their contact info to Andy. I know that's always a blessing to have that. So this one way we can be encouraging and supporting church plants is by encouraging people to check them out. So, well, very good. If y'all have further questions as an audience, feel free to PM me. We've got some questions in the comments that were really good, and hopefully in the future we can follow up with that. But Andy, thank you for your time. Blessings on your ministry, and we'll look forward to doing this again.
All righty. Talk to you later.
God bless.